All right, Congressman, we're live.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell University's conversation with Abe Foxman on the issue of the state of anti-Semitism globally and in the United States. You're in for some insightful and deep analysis this evening. For those of you who have heard Mr. Foxman speak, you know that he is the leading authority on the issue of anti-Semitism, not just in the US, but in the world. If you haven't heard him speak, you are in for a treat. Before I properly introduce him, just a little bit of housekeeping. I will have a conversation with Mr. Foxman for about a half an hour, and then at 7:30, we will open it up to questions from our viewing audience. Natalie will get on at 7:30 and give you instructions on how to ask a question. For those of you who are new to our programs, the Institute of Politics and Global Affairs at Cornell University has one mission, and that is to build resilience around democratic norms by deepening discourse and raising understanding. And we do it in a relentlessly bipartisan way. Last night, we had General H.R. McMaster. We've had Reince Priebus, President Trump's chief of staff. We've had Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Congressman Adam Schiff, so many senators and members of Congress and diplomats and pundits, too many to really count. And so we welcome you to this program and others. 1 week from yesterday, next Tuesday night, we'll be presenting a program on what happened with polling in the 2020 election. So we invite you to join us next Tuesday at 7 p.m. We have a pollster from President Trump's campaign and a prominent Democratic pollster. And we just secured the House Problem Solvers. They will be doing a congressional conversation on whether there are areas of compromise between Congress, congressional Republicans and Democrats, and the Biden administration. Will be featuring that in the days before the inauguration. For more information about what we do, you can just Google Cornell Institute of Politics and you will see our full calendar. But tonight, as I said before, very special guest on a sobering topic, Abe Foxman. He is the world-renowned leader in the fight against anti-Semitism and bigotry and discrimination. He is the National Director Emeritus of the Anti-Defamation League. He retired from the ADL in 2015, having served a total of 50 years with the organization, including serving as National Director from 1987 through 2015. He's currently the Director and Chairman of the Center for the Study of Anti-Semitism at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust in New York City, visiting lecturer at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Affairs, and a non-resident research fellow at the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv. He's the co-author, and I've read every one of his books, and they are just brilliant and recommended reading. His books include Viral Hate, which I just read, and he is also the authors of Jews and Money, The Story of a Stereotype, The Deadliest Lies, The Israel Lobby, and the Myth of Jewish Control, and Never Again, The Threat of the New Anti-Semitism. During his long career, Mr. Foxman has had direct consultations with world leaders in Europe and Russia and Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, China, Japan, South Africa, Argentina. There's hardly a place on the globe that Abe Foxman has not been asked to consult. He's also held many conversations with Palestinian leaders on problems of ethnic hatred, violence, terrorism, and promoting democracy, and many audiences with Pope John Paul II, Pope Benedict XVI, and Pope Francis. He has conferred with every president from Ronald Reagan to Barack Obama. I'm sure that the incoming president will be calling him before very long if he hasn't already. And finally, Mr. Foxman is a Holocaust survivor. He was saved from the Holocaust by his Polish Catholic nursemaid, who baptized and raised him as a Catholic during the war years. His parents survived the war, but 14 members of his family were lost. He arrived in America in 1950 with his parents. I'm sure when he arrived, even as a young child, he never could have imagined the impact that he would have on behalf of the Jewish community in the United States and around the world. Abe Foxman, thank you so much for joining us. We're very grateful to you.
Thank you, Congressman.
Let's begin. Let's plunge right into it. The title of this conversation is The State of Global Anti-Semitism. So I'd like to begin with your assessment. You've been a global leader on this issue for many decades. How do you describe the current state of anti-Semitism in the United States and around the world? Is this the worst it's been for some time?
No. Anti-Semitic, I've been, as you indicated, to ADL 50 years. And for 50 years, we tried to tell the American Jewish community, the American community, that there's a serious problem in this country, anti-Semitism. But it really was never really taken seriously. We did polling for 30, 40 years. And what it told us was that there are millions of infected anti-Semites in this country. From the beginning of the FBI inventory, when the FBI started following hate crimes, from the first day till last year, the #1 targets of religious bigotry and attacks are Jews, continue to be Jews. So anti-Semitism has always been a serious problem in this country, but it was contained. The anti-Semites primarily were latent. Their behavior was controlled to the extent that we built, I would say, once those of us dealing with the subject came to the realization that we're dealing with a disease or a virus which doesn't have a vaccine or an antidote, then we have to figure out ways to contain it without eliminating it. And I think we did very well for quite a number of years through a series of elements containing it. I think first and foremost was to build a civil consensus that anti-Semitism is un-American, immoral, un-Christian, unacceptable. And that while our Constitution permits you to be an anti-Semite or a bigot, there are consequences, societal consequences. Then there were coalitions that, we used litigation, we used legislation, we used the media. The media was a very, very important element to expose, to embarrass, and to educate. All these things worked. All these things contained the level of anti-Semitism. In recent years, and we can talk about that a little bit later, the firewall dissipated. Things started happening in this country, whereas the anti-Semitism, which was in the sewers, it was there. The millions of people knew, felt it, but knew not to act it out. And I would just say to you in a moment, Charlottesville, the 200 anti-Semites in Charlottesville were not created 3 years ago. They were always there, but they knew enough not to broadcast, not to flaunt their anti-Semitism. The atmosphere in the last couple of years changed that. But so a long answer to a short question was, it's always been here. It's always been serious, but we had ways of containing it. In terms of Europe, a totally different situation. Mm-hmm. Look, Europe anti-Semitism is as old as the history of Europe. And it goes back Eastern Europe, Western Europe. It didn't matter, who ruled, whether it was monarchies, whether it was isms. It really didn't matter. Anti-Semitism, goes back in England. You had the expulsion of Jews in the 11th century. There was no country in Europe that was immune to anti-Semitism. In Europe, the tradition of ideology or religion, it was violent. And so the history of anti-Semitism in Europe goes back hundreds, and if you will, thousands of years. And it also served the purpose, political, religious purpose, for all kinds of rulers and non-rulers. I remember reading an essay a long time ago, and I would recommend it to the listeners, and it's an essay written by Mark Twain called Concerning the Jews. In the 1890s, Mark Twain, who got himself into debt, went on a speaking tour in Europe to try to pay off his debts. And wherever he went, he found anti-Semitism. Whoever he visited with, rich people were anti-Semitic, poor people, smart people, stupid people, religious people, atheists. And he came back to the United States and wrote an essay concerning the Jews. He came to his own conclusion that it's jealousy, that the reason for anti-Semitism was jealousy. The fact is, if we could figure out what the reason is, we can maybe find the antidote. The trouble is that anti-Semitism serves very many masters, and it metastasizes for the various interests. And in Europe, it played historically for centuries. And of course, it was violent. You know, the Holocaust, Jews were killed in Eastern Europe and Western Europe. They were killed in Lithuania and Latvia, but they were also killed in Italy and France. So that disease there it's still there. It has never really been catharsized. Look, it took 50 to 70 years for some of the countries now to acknowledge that they had a role in the destruction of the Jews. So Europe is a totally different situation. And now you have the overlay in Europe of Islam, radical Islam, jihadism. And today the threat in Europe to Jews physically comes from the extreme right, which has had a rebirth, whether it's in Germany or a nationalist in Hungary and other places. But you also have the extremist jihadist movement, which by virtue of the numbers of Muslims who have come from Arab and North Africa, pose a physical danger to Jews and the Jewish community.
You mentioned containment. There was a time when we were able to somehow contain those impulses, or at least the expressions. But now it seems as if the stigma has lifted. Not only Charlottesville, but people protesting masks and rules with respect to COVID, waving swastika banners. So what has happened? Why has that containment failed over the past several years?
Well, we used to have a consensus in this country, what's right or wrong. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't great. Political correctness was not a panacea, but it certainly wasn't a sin. It's become a sin, it's become a crime in some areas. We used to also have an element of what's true, the truth. Mm-hmm. So these things have fallen apart in the last couple of years. I think Trump is part of it. Trumpism is part of it, but not all of it. Mm-hmm. That means he bears a certain responsibility because he broke all the taboos. When you break taboos or I break taboos, it has consequences, but not the same consequences when the #1 citizen of our country breaks taboos. And so that's what happened to Charlottesville. These anti-Semites who he did not create, they were there. They were bigots. They were anti-Semites. He didn't give them the phrase, you know, no one will replace us. Jews will not replace us. But they felt a legitimacy all of a sudden. They felt that they were emboldened, that now it's okay. Now if I surface as an anti-Semite, I won't pay the consequences. Because that's another one of the containment elements. Look, Mel Gibson, I use as an example of how America works. Unlike Europe, in Europe, you have legislation against anti-Semitism and you have more anti-Semitism in here. In our country, as I said, the Constitution says you can be a bigot. We'll protect your right to be a bigot. But if you're a bigot, you will pay social consequences. And to me, again, Mel Gibson is that prime example. Mel Gibson, at one point in his life, was Mr. America. He was the people's choice, the greatest actor, director, producer, highest paid person in Hollywood. And then all of a sudden, wow, when he revealed himself as an anti-Semite, he wasn't taken to jail. He got taken to jail after he was a drunk, etc. But all of a sudden, his popularity plummeted. That's the difference of America, because there were consequences to uncivil behavior and action, etc. That's dissipated. If you can say anything you want and you can attack anybody you want and everything becomes politicized, wow, it's a different atmosphere. And that's basically the change that we're suffering now. Look, when you look at American anti-Semitism, in all these years, there were millions of anti-Semites, but you didn't have a Pittsburgh, you didn't have a Poway, you didn't have a Jersey City. Because again, not that these anti-Semites weren't there, but they knew enough that they couldn't get away with it. They feel that the atmosphere in our country, anything goes.
Maybe not expressed to the extent that it is now, but it was persistent in American history. Have the motivations changed, do you believe? What causes anti-Semitism, and have the dynamics, has the input changed over the years?
See, again, it goes back to that question. If we knew what causes anti-Semitism, we could eliminate it. The thing is, it goes back to Mark Twain. It serves all kinds of masters, all kinds of interests. It can be religious, it could be economic, it could be psychological, it doesn't really matter. Now, but it operates in an environment. Some environments don't tolerate it. Some environments put a price on it. What's really the other, if you would ask me one single factor that has changed anti-Semitism, I would say it's Al Gore's internet. The internet, on one hand, which is a true irony, on one hand, it has brought about more information, more interaction, more communication, more knowledge than one could have ever imagined. And yet at the same time, it provided a superhighway, an underground superhighway for bigots and bigotry. And I remember in my days in the ADL, now it's a lot more in the news, the terms of the technology, tech industry coming out of Palo Alto. I went several times to Palo Alto and sat with some of these geniuses, and I said, thank you. But you have also created unintended consequences to your genius. I know it's not your fault, and I don't blame you, but you can't say to us algorithms and then turn our back, your back on us. You have a certain responsibility. Many years ago, when the ADL celebrated or commemorated, celebrate 100 years of fighting prejudice. It's not a celebration, it's just still there. But when we commemorated 100 years of the ADL, I was asked, give me one thing that the ADL did that had the greatest impact on your goals and purposes. And it wasn't easy, but I came up with something that we did. And it was called the anti-mask law. Mm-hmm. It was in the heyday of the Ku Klux Klan. And we came up with an approach which said, you know what, let's pass legislation which will prohibit people to march in public, act out in public with their heads covered. Because we believed that the bigots who, under cover of a mask, who during the day were lawyers, doctors, grocery men, at night, under cover of hiding their face, were willing to act out, were courageous to act out their bigotry. But if we remove that mask from their face, it would severely impact on the Ku Klux Klan and on bigotry. And you know what? We were right. Mm-hmm. The most important element to the downfall of the Ku Klux Klan was to remove the mask from the Klansmen. Mm-hmm. Ironically, fast forward 50 years later, comes the internet and puts that mask back on the bigot, gives the bigot that protection, that anonymity, that courage, if you will, to be a bigot. And we're now struggling. How do you balance First Amendment freedoms and civility? I would say to you that the internet, and again, I'm not taking away all the wonderful things, even our Zoom is thanks to the internet tonight. We couldn't have been communicating. But at the same time, we're paying such a heavy price for it that we need to figure out a way how to balance. Otherwise, it protects the bigot, because today you can transmit in nanoseconds bigotry anonymously, protecting who and what you are.
I want to delve into the role of social media. I read in your book Viral Hate, and we're going to post a link so that people can purchase it if they'd like, and I recommend that you do. I just want to read a passage from Viral Hate and ask you to elaborate on it. You wrote, quote, "Hitler and the Nazis could never have dreamed of such an engine of hate. Online anti-Semites are joined by Islamophobes, racists, misogynists, homophobes, and other kinds of vicious haters. The most virulent hate mongers are joined by a growing number of normally right-minded people who employ the shield of online anonymity to say horrible, hurtful, and hateful things in comment sections and elsewhere across the internet, adding to the deterioration of civil discourse." And then you go on to write, "Internet hate speech serves to mislead millions of innocent people, especially young people who are enthusiastic users of new technology, thereby recruiting the next generation of bigots, racists, sexists, homophobes, and anti-Semites." You mentioned that you went out to Palo Alto and you had these conversations. What role, what responsibilities do social media platforms have to help combat that hate speech on their platforms?
Well, the answer is they do, and they're feeling it, and they're beginning to step up to the plate. And I guess one of the reasons, of course, is financial, because one of the things I remember when women stood up and said, "We don't want to see misogyny on it," and all of a sudden there was the beginning of a boycott. All of a sudden they found ways to deal with the algorithms. Today, when Congress and the general public is beginning to say, "Hey, you know, you have a response." Listen, for years I couldn't understand Facebook could not remove Holocaust denial. You know, is there really a question whether Jews were murdered in the Holocaust? They finally did it. They're still struggling with it. So I think pressure can work. And because algorithms, you can control algorithms. Unfortunately, you can maneuver algorithms, we now know. So they do have a responsibility. They do have a responsibility. But Congress, we have a problem of this balance. It's, you know, it's easier said than done. Look, after 9/11, we struggled. I remember with the Patriot Act. How do we balance security with freedom? You know, we want security, we want our freedom. We haven't gotten there yet, but we struggle. We're still struggling with it. This is the next struggle. It's a very serious struggle. How do we balance our freedoms with civility? Look, internet, as I said before, destroyed privacy. We already paid a very serious price. For all the goodies, we gave up privacy. I don't want to give up civility. We need to protect civility, because at the end of the day, that's what keeps us as a society of respect and decency.
Let's take a little tour of Europe. Anti-Semitism, you mentioned before, it comes from the left and the right. I'd like you to reflect on some recent developments in the UK. Jeremy Corbyn, the leader of the Labour Party, was suspended from his party because of anti-Semitism and was just reinstated recently. In Hungary, you have Viktor Orban, who at best tolerates, at worst propagates anti-Semitic stereotypes in campaigns and elections. He's convinced many people in Hungary that the existential threat to Hungary is George Soros and migrants who are Muslim. There are no Muslim migrants in Hungary, but he's convinced people of that. Can you comment on both, on Corbyn and Orban and this growing phenomenon of anti-Semitism from both left and right?
It's a great example to show that this disease of anti-Semitism has no political favorites, that it plays both ends of the political spectrum. Look, historically, it played communism and it played Nazism. So, you know, fascism, both opposite. And here too, so here you have the left, and you would think that the left would be immune from it. No, it was so rife. Israel played a role in it. Israel was used as a platform to legitimize some of the classic left-wing anti-Semitism. And Orban is a perfect example of the right, of supranationalism, nationalism. And so it thrives, and it's thriving more and more in Europe. I would say today more on the right than on the left. And again, the threat is there, but the left is aligned in many places with Islamist jihadism. So Yeah, it's an example of saying it's a bed. Anti-Semitism is a bedfellow, both on the left and both on the right.
Now let's talk about college campuses. We're going to go to questions in just a few minutes. Let's talk about the BDS movement and your assessment of the impact of the BDS movement on anti-Semitic attitudes on college campuses.
I'm a minority on the BDS phenomenon. I think we've given it more credit than it's worth. I think it makes a lot of noise, but it has really had, well, it has an impact, which I want to talk about, but no serious impact. That means no university in the United States has changed its relationship with Israel, its contracts or its exchanges. The coronavirus changed a lot of things, but the BDS really had no success. I remember a conversation I had with the Prime Minister of Israel a year or two ago about BDS, and he says, you know what, I don't have time to go to the bathroom because the country's all lined up trying to do business with us. And now certainly in this, we have to give Donald Trump credit where credit is due. The Abrahamic Accord, the new relationship between Israel and the UAE and Bahrain and hopefully Sudan certainly shows that the BDS movement has nothing, because the BDS movement not only was promoting, unless Palestine is resolved, you can't have relationships, and they do have relationships, but also to undo Israel. Yeah, but the BDS movement, the ideology is very serious, because to challenge, the only country that it challenges the legitimacy of is the Jewish state. The only national movement of liberation that has no legitimacy is the Jewish state. That's an element of clear anti-Semitism. What I am concerned is, on the college campus, is an impression that it leaves. That means most students on the college campus don't care. They want to have fun, they want to get their degree. And 20 years from now, when they wake up, and they become citizens or congressmen, et cetera, what's the image that they had on the campus about Israel? And the image is a negative one, that Israel is bad, that Israel doesn't deserve to be. And that troubles me. It also troubles me that kids on a college campus, I Stars of David's out. They wore T-shirts with Coca-Cola or Love Israel. They don't wear them anymore. And you don't see the Star of David out there. Polls have been taken. The American Jewish Committee recently took a poll which said that the Jews are hiding their identity, especially on a college campus. That's horrific. In the United States in the year 2020, for Jewish kids to hide their identity, that's a result of BDS. And that's terrible, because one of the prices of anti-Semitism is when Jews begin to fear being Jewish, then God forbid Hitler will have has a comeback.
I have one final question for you. It's a personal one. 50 years talking with prime ministers and popes and lowly members of the House of Representatives and senators and presidents. What do you think was your most impactful moment in defending against anti-Semitism? Is there one that you can share with us?
I'm not into memoirs yet, so I haven't focused on that, Steve. But I will tell you, the coming to appreciate that you can change people's minds and hearts. Wow. Wow. When you come to that moment, and listen, I've met with I met with bigots, because I always believed, there's room for repair, for reform, etc. And those are memorable moments. Some very serious bigots who were ready, maybe because of consequences. Mel Gibson I failed with, by the way.
Really?
It's a failure.
How so?
Because he tried to have meetings, he didn't mean it, it was all for show, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I would say, my wife once said, why don't you write a book, Letters You Have Written? Letters that I have written for others, where they wanted to express their retraction, et cetera. So that's one. Number two is the fact to what extent one person can make a difference. Listen, you and I, we are so lucky, Steve. We are so lucky. Because at the end of the day, in our world, we can say we have not only tried to make a difference, but we've made a difference. Mm-hmm. And if we lessened 1 ounce of fear, 1 ounce of hate, if somebody sleeps better because of what you did or I did, wow. So yeah, that's the success. Look, for me, the privilege, I survived the worst anti-Semitism. I survived the Holocaust when 1.5 million Jewish children perished. And I survived because a woman risked her life to save me. And in my adult life, to work with the Anti-Defamation League, to fight anti-Semitism, prejudice, bigotry, embrace understanding, wow, how lucky can you be? So to me, yeah, there's some exciting, even with Arafat or with the Pope, very exciting moments. But it's the opportunity to be able to change people's minds and hearts, which really makes it all worthwhile.
You have done it so effectively. Before we transition into questions, I do want to acknowledge several special guests who've joined. The former United States Senator from Illinois, Mark Kirk, is with us, a great Republican from the state of Illinois. Former Congressman Tom Coleman, a Republican from Missouri. New York State Assemblyman Chuck Levine is with us. Also, your good friend, Abe Roger Tillis, a regent in the state of New York. Fred Zeidman, who heads the Council for Secure America and was President George W. Bush's pick to chair the Holocaust Memorial Council, and Ira Rickless, a very wonderful supporter. Our sponsors for tonight's event are Bert Brodsky, the chairman of BEB Capital and the chairman of the Alzheimer's Foundation of America, and Mr. Bruce Pergament and Randy Pergament, very strong supporters of the Institute. With that, I'm going to have Natalie give everybody instructions so that we can open it up to questions and answers in our remaining 25 minutes. Natalie?
Absolutely. So our first 2 questions will come one from each sponsor. We have Mr. Pergament first and Mr. Brodsky. If everybody would like to line up in the meantime, you'll see a raised hand function at the bottom of your screen that will put you in the queue. Also, if you'd like to type your question in, we have a Q&A function as well. So we'll be pulling from both. Mr. Pergament, go ahead.
Bruce, I think you're muted. There you go, sir.
Okay. Yeah, Abe, I want to say it was really enlightening to hear you speak tonight. I've heard you speak so many times, and what you've done for all of us as Jews has been so historical and so profound, and I'm grateful for all your years of service. And I want to actually tap on that history that you have, because I, as a Jew here in America, am very concerned by this dramatic rise in anti-Semitism over the last 4 years. In my lifetime, I haven't remembered anything so striking that we see these days. And I wanted to tap on your background so you could put this in perspective and tell us how you feel what's been going on these last 4 years from anti-Semitism compares to, say, the last 50 years or 70 or more here in this country. How concerned should we be from a historical perspective?
I guess the first thing I would say to you, Bruce, is anti-Semitism is not an existentialist threat to the Jewish community. It has never been, and it isn't now either. It's, as I indicated earlier, it's always been here. What we're seeing is it's more public. And I even give credit to the media. The media is now covering it. It never covered it before. In all the years that I was involved in trying to educate on the nature of anti-Semitism, the threat of anti-Semitism, the seriousness, nobody bothered to write about it, okay? Except when we got a celebrity all of a sudden, then it made news. So one of the reasons you're feeling it, you're seeing it is, of course, yes, there's been death. We have not seen violence to the extent of death in this country in the 300 years of Jews in America. Okay, so we saw it in the last several years. I said Pittsburgh, Poway, Jersey City. That's traumatic. That's traumatic because this was one country where Jews felt, Jews don't get killed because they're Jews. And all of a sudden, it's here, but it's always been there. The potential has always been there. So we need to take it seriously. I think we need to take security seriously. Listen, a lot of things have changed after 9/11. We've learned to take security seriously in areas of our life that we never thought well, this is another one. And we've been saying it all along. As long as there are bigots, and there is no antidote to their bigotry, you have to take it seriously. And so I think we need to rebuild civility. I think we need to rebuild that firewall, that containment of what America is all about. And America is about difference, but it's about respect. And I am an optimist. I've always been an optimist in my life, even in the dark moments. For me to have survived and to be a pessimist about Jewish future, when I look back, when you see a state of Israel, when you see the growth of the American Jewish community, I continue to be an optimist. I don't like to make comparisons. We need to look at history, but we need to be careful about looking at history and making comparisons. We need to learn from history more than to begin to compare it. But I'm an optimist about American Jewish life. I'm an optimist about the American Jewish community. And I do not believe that anti-Semitism is an existential threat or will become, but we need to take it seriously. We can't just ignore it.
Bert Brodsky.
So, yeah, I'm on. So, Mr. Foxman, you say that anti-Semites should be called out, should be embarrassed, it should not be anonymous. Yet, in the resolution passed in Congress, which was specifically as a result of Congresswoman Omar's comments, they specifically do not mention her. They let us stay anonymous. Don't you feel there's something lacking in Congress if they can't call out by name an anti-Semite, especially since they create a resolution specifically as a result of what she did and said?
I think what she said was offensive, obnoxious, and anti-Semitic. But I also think that doing a resolution was not what this was all. It was politics. It was one side of the political world trying to embarrass the other side because those four are bigoted, some are anti-Semites. So again, I look at it in perspective. Yes, I'm concerned about what they say, but I'm not sure that the resolution was the way to deal with it. I am concerned. I think anti-Semitism is too serious to be politicized. And it was politicized. There were all kinds of ways to deal with it rather than, we can disagree. I thought a resolution was a political way to go about it. There were other ways to go about it. So I don't consider those four to be a threat to Jewish life or to America's relationship with Israel.
But don't let them hide in anonymity.
But they were challenged. They were criticized. There were editorials. There were people who spoke out. A resolution became a political football, and we were being used in the political football. I don't want Jews or anti-Semitism to be politicized. And unfortunately, anti-Semitism has been politicized in the last couple of years. Democrats say it's Republicans, Republicans say it's Democrats. That doesn't help fighting anti-Semitism.
Natalie, let's go to the next question, please.
Absolutely. Our next question comes from Harriet Schleifer. Harriet, could you unmute yourself, please?
Thank you very much. Abe, I don't know if you recall, but we both sit on the JBS TV board, and I am the president of AJC at this, right now. Our survey, the AJC survey, did indicate that about 50% of Americans don't even understand what anti-Semitism is in the first place. And respondents also indicated that they would not particularly change their mind based upon the Jewish, a Jewish person's feeling about something being anti-Semitic or not. It would not be part of their consideration, even if they did know what anti-Semitism is. I'm wondering whether we could make better use of the IHRA definition, the working definition of anti-Semitism, and, push that out into different fora. And do you think that that would be a fruitful strategy to educate people? And if so, in what fora would you try and introduce, acceptance of that definition?
Harriet, I think what your survey, what I recall, indicated was that most people didn't know what anti-Semitism was, but they knew what anti-Jewish was. That's good enough for me. So as long as they know what a negative. Now, I don't think, with all due respect, I think it's wonderful that there is this effort to have a universally accepted definition of anti-Semitism, which I guess at the end of the day will make it for less conferences on anti-Semitism. But a definition does not fight anti-Semitism. A definition, the best definition, is not going to prevent one anti-Semite. It's a useful tool, so you don't have to spend time arguing about it. I think probably the most worthwhile result of this whole effort is that I don't have to argue anymore that if you criticize the state of Israel and only the state of Israel, if you challenge the legitimacy of Israel and only the state of Israel, that's anti-Semitism. So yeah, that it helps say it, so I don't have to argue and repeat. One of the most frequently asked questions I used to get was, can't I criticize Israel without being called an anti-Semite? And the answer is yes, absolutely. Israel's criticized by more Israelis per square kilometer, per square Jew in the world than anywhere else. So be my guest, criticize. But I want to hear that same criticism, that same standard applied to other countries. And if you don't, bingo, you're an anti-Semite. If the only if you like Palestinian nationalism and Chinese nationalism and German nationalism, but the only nationalism that you think is racist is Jewish nationalism, bingo, you're an anti-Semite. So now I don't have to explain it. I can refer to this definition in the IIJ, but besides that, it's not going to eliminate anti-Semitism. But yeah, it's nice if institutions adopt it, so we know it's on the record. This is what anti-Semitism is.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Harriet. Let's get the next question, please.
Sure. So we're going to take the next question from the chat from Avram. He has a question. He asked, what role did resurgent anti-Semitism play in the 2020 US presidential election, wherein Jewish voters backed President-elect Biden over Trump by 77 to 21%?
I'm not sure I understand the question, but if I understand it, my answer is no, anti-Semitism didn't play any role in this last election, to the best of my knowledge, unless I missed something. Steve, do you see anything I didn't see?
No, I mean, my argument has always been in elections, if you have racist or anti-Semitic impulses, you're not voting for a Democrat in any event. So I'm not sure that it would have played out. Let's take another question, please, Natalie.
Absolutely. So we have a question in the chat that asks, what is the most important thing we can teach our 20-something-year-old kids? What are the best tools that we can give them to combat anti-Semitism?
Well, knowledge. Unfortunately, we don't teach history. We don't teach modern history. Holocaust, learning about the Holocaust is a lesson to better understand what hate can bring to. What the gas chambers in Auschwitz didn't begin with bricks; they began with words. 9/11 didn't begin with box cutters; they began with hateful words. So yeah, I think teaching of history, making it relevant to today, is very, very important. Again, as I said, there is no antidote. There's no vaccine. The only thing that we have is education. Education is a long, slow process. You can be infected with anti-Semitism in a nanosecond. It takes a long time to undo it. But yeah, an understanding, to me, an understanding of the Holocaust is universal, because it's all the elements of what hate can do, what people can or cannot do, what they're capable of in the good and the bad. And it's a microcosm which impacts not only on Jews, but impacts on the whole element of hate and bigotry and prejudice. And so I think it's still the best vehicle at various ages to impact. And also, I go back to my beginnings, and that is to teach people they can make a difference. And the difference begins by saying no to a bully. The difference begins by saying no to an ethnic joke. So it sounds very trite, but it's not that easy to say no to a bully when other, when you're the only one standing up. It's not so easy to say that's not funny, because and we see now to what extent, again, there used to be the taboos are gone. We need to rebuild those taboos and to empower young people that they can make a difference, and a big difference, in terms of respect and relationship to their peers and to others.
Natalie, let's take the next question, please.
Great. From the Q&A portion, Stephen asked, does the creation of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, D.C. and the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York City help combat anti-Semitism? And if so, how?
Well, it's basically what I just tried to say in the last few moments, which is, it's a hands-on lesson to understand what hate can do. And when you visit the museums, when you interact with the artifacts, with the stories, it becomes, takes it off the page of a book, makes it more interactive. And I've walked through the museums, both museums, with young groups of students, and I talked to them before and afterwards. And it's not 100%, but the impact of that experience of living through with an individual or with a story, with an artifact, does make a difference. So yeah, it's very powerful, because we're losing the witnesses. And at least that's the next thing to the witness. So yeah, museums are important. It's an important experience.
Thank you. Also, from the chat, we have Elise asking, do we do the issue of solving anti-Semitism a disservice by giving it a special name rather than calling it racism and setting it apart as something different and separate?
It's an interesting question. Racism, I guess, is the generic, but anti-Semitism, unfortunately, historically has been unique in the sense that, no other people have ever been singled out for 2,000 years to be scapegoated and singled out, and a genocide of a people. It's anti-Semitism. Rwanda is a genocide of a people, and I don't think it should be subsumed under racism. There is a special sad lesson about genocide, in the sense of singling out a people for its elimination. It's something we can discuss. I think that racism is too broad and doesn't mean very much to very many people, and therefore you have to single out what racism are we talking, what prejudice are we talking, what bigotry are we talking about. And anti-Semitism, unfortunately, for 2,000 years has been there, and it shouldn't be subsumed under another name.
Thank you. So we have a question from Roger Tillis. Roger, if you could please unmute.
I will. Hello, Abe. Hello, Steve.
Hey, Roger.
I am curious to know, New York and many other states have a requirement for Holocaust education as part of the curriculum, but there's no standard. There's no parameter to it, whatever. Some schools might have 90 minutes and some schools might have 90 days. When it's brought up to educators, I find that nobody cares. Nobody cares. they're worried more about the bullying and tolerance in their schools. But in terms of curriculum or anything else, they're worried more about the civility, which has doubled and tripled in the schools in the last 2 or 3 years. I don't know how we can better get Holocaust education into our schools, but I'm curious to know if you have any great ideas about it, because I know the museums do very well, but not that many people can go to the museums.
Roger, I think we need to educate the educators. I find the most successful students at the museum that I see are teachers and administrators. I think they're overwhelmed. I think many of them don't understand. They don't understand the relevance. It's also time consuming, it's costly, it needs a specialty. So yeah, I think I would invest in educating teachers and administrators who will then understand how relevant it is to fight bullying, how relevant it is to build civility. But most of them, Roger, as you know better than most, don't know. Don't know what anti-Semitism, certainly don't know what Holocaust is except what they've heard. Because they didn't learn it when they were in school, right? They didn't. It was not a subject. We don't teach history, modern history. We don't go to, I don't want to talk about education, but no, I think an investment. There's also money. You have to educate the educator. You have to give them time. You have to give them the ability to do it. But I would educate the educators, and that would make a difference later on for them teaching it and having courses and making it relevant to the students.
So thank you.
Thank you, Roger. We have about 7 minutes left. We do have a hard stop at 8 o'clock, and so we're going to accommodate as many questions as we can. Natalie, let's go to the next question, please.
Absolutely. So our next question comes from Ruth Collins. Ruth, if you could please unmute yourself.
Hi. So I'm a Cornell professor, and every semester I have students come into my office that are profoundly upset by rejections and experiences they've had from peers and other professors, mostly in an anti-Semitic, anti-Zionist type of experience. And I hear you. I want to know what do I tell these students? Because I don't think it's okay to tell them to drop everything and work on anti-bullying or anti-Semitism. They've got careers. They want to do science and medicine, etc. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand. So students are coming to you for counseling in terms of what they should do in life after they've experienced.
No. I think the point she's making is that students will confide in her that they have seen anti-Semitism or been exposed to it. They feel that they've been victims of it. What should a college professor say to a student who has shares those thoughts?
Right. Thank you. Often at the hands of peers, other professors. I mean, creating a climate that's profoundly emotionally disturbing.
So your challenge is to talk to your peers and not to your students, because they're the cause of the problem. The students, it's very difficult for a student to fight, and at least they come to you to share with you their anxieties so the answer is to deal with your peers, which again is not that easy. It's just another level of a bullying type of environment, because if that's what the environment is. So yeah, it's easy for me to say, but that's the only response, is to confront and to challenge the peers who create this atmosphere, and to tell the students that you and others are doing it.
Okay, I think we're going to have time for 2 more questions. Natalie?
Okay, so we have Bob Blau who's next. Bob, if you could please unmute yourself.
Yes, it's a simple question. Does anti-Semitism need intent? Let me give you an example. When I was on the stock exchange, somebody came up to me and says, "Can I Jew you down on the price?" Is that inherently anti-Semitic, or does it have to have the intent?
No, it may be ignorance. To a lot of people, they've heard it, they don't even know what it is. But whether it's intended or not, I think you or I have a responsibility to correct them, to fix it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they meant it pejoratively or part of what they thought was surrounding culture, or they were being cute or whatever. It really, I don't care about the intent. I think one needs to use it as a learning, teaching moment. And to embarrass, if they're ignorant, then you educate them. If they're not ignorant in intent, you can embarrass them. But, listen, to a victim of prejudice, he or she really doesn't care whether it was intended or not. So maybe some of the Germans who killed Jews didn't intend it, but they killed them. So I don't want to get into the psychoanalytics of a bigot. Challenge the bigot, educate the bigot. And again, I believe that most people who use it and say it don't know what it is. They're trying to be cute, or they're trying to be in, or they're trying to whatever. But if they do, if it's intended, fine, then you will embarrass them. If it's ignorant, you will educate them.
All right, we have two final questions. Let's go to them as quickly as we can. Natalie?
Yep, Mr. Mayrock, could you please unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Let's Isidore, before you begin, let's take your question, and then I see Fred Zeidman has a question. With Abe, with your permission, we'll ask Isidore to pose his, then Fred, and then you can answer both. How's that?
Yeah, Abe, thank you for your service. How can we turn around the positions at the UN? I support an organization, UN Watch, and I'm very disturbed this past 10 years just how anti-Israel they are.
Okay, thank you, Isidore. And Natalie, would you recognize Fred Zeidman?
Absolutely, he's unmuted.
Right. Thank you. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
You're unmuted, Fred.
Great. First of all, I'm sitting here and I'm stuttering. I'm looking at two people who I have as much respect for as anybody in the whole Jewish world or world ever. I'm just appreciate the opportunity. More than a question, again, having lived through for 10 years, almost every question that Abe answered, I will tell you he was correct on every one of them. When I first took the position at the museum, I went to the Houston Museum and I sat down with a Holocaust survivor in Houston, Walter Case, and I said, tell me what I need to know. And what he said to me is that when he walks into a classroom, he can tell immediately if the class is going to be interested or not, and it's a result of what the teacher has taught them. So it is the only way to do it. And as we lose all of our survivors, there's going to be nobody who has borne witness. And so you look at the museums, you look at the activity of the museums in planning the programming. I mean, look, we have plenty of problems in this world right now. Abe, Steve, how are we going to continue this education? How are we going to make our Holocaust unique? I used to love it. If people just wanted to see a genocide, they could go to the American Indian Museum because the food was much better there than we had at ours. But how are we going to continue this legacy when there's no one else to do it? It becomes tougher every day. And I'd love for the two experts to tell me how do we make this happen?
Fred, we have no choice. So when the survivors are fewer and fewer, so we've come up with I don't know how you call it. The Shoah Foundation came up with I don't know, pseudo survivors. There are more movies that we ever dreamt would be made about the Holocaust. There is the Shoah Foundation. There are testimonies. There are more books we could have ever imagined would have been written. I will also say to you, if you would have said to me 50 years ago that the Shoah would continue to be a subject of films, books, discussions, museums. I'm not sure I would have thought it would have. So it's getting tougher, but again, at the same time, there is this interest, this conversation. I think we're going to need to invest money in educators. I think at the end of the day, as I said earlier, that's where the answer lies. Now, on the UN, don't give up. We've made progress. It's not perfect. The UN is what the world is. The world hasn't changed. Don't expect the UN all of a sudden to change, but it is changing. Thanks to Donald Trump, there has been more change. The representation was honest and tough. We need to continue that representation as America in the UN. So UN Watch is important. Don't give up. The changes are slow, but they are coming. And you know, it's the only way is to keep pushing, because if you don't push, they will push. They push every day. So I'm an optimist. It's gotten better and will get better. And I think what Donald Trump did at the UN will leave a message for the Biden administration in terms of their attitudes towards Israel in the UN.
Abe Foxman, I want to conclude this session by hearkening back to something that you said. You said there may not have been one moment that stood out in your career, but your impact was in changing hearts and minds. And that is important for all of us. We all have that obligation. When faced with anti-Semitism or racism or any element of bigotry, if we will all work to change people's hearts and minds, we'll have a better world. And who has made more of an impact in giving us that better world than Abe Foxman? Thank you, Abe, for everything that you have done. Next Tuesday, polling, what went wrong in the 2020 election? Feel free to join us. Google Cornell Institute of Politics, and you can get the details. Be well and be safe, everybody. And again, Abe Foxman, thank you very much.
Thank you.